Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart and forgotten corners of Ontario, through isolated small towns, endless forests, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying small-town horror stories ever recorded. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are real, documented encounters from ordinary people who never expected to face true evil. From abandoned lakeside towns to farmhouses that should have stayed empty. From quiet streets to disappearances that defy explanation. Tonight, you will hear horrors that refuse to be forgotten. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Ontario, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Marshall, and this happened when I was 26, living in a small town near Coldwater, Ontario. I had just taken a night job delivering medical supplies between rural clinics. The kind of work no one asks questions about because everyone needs it done. My goal was simple: save enough money to leave town for good. Coldwater had a way of holding people down, wrapping them in routine and silence until they stopped dreaming. There was one stretch of road everyone warned me about. A narrow, unlit back road cutting through thick forest, officially unnamed, unofficially called the Whistling Road. Locals said it saved time. They also said not to stop there after dark. I laughed it off. Small towns survive on rumors. The first night I drove it, the radio lost signal halfway through. That's when I heard it. Soft, human whistling, perfectly in tune, drifting through my open window. Even though I hadn't passed a single house in miles. At first, I told myself it was my imagination. Fatigue does strange things to the brain, especially when you're alone at night with nothing but trees pressing in on both sides. Still, the whistling followed me. It didn't come from one direction. It felt like it surrounded the truck, slipping in and out of the engine noise. The sound stopped the moment I slowed down. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. I wanted to speed up, but something deep in my gut warned me not to. Like prey freezing instead of running. When I reached the clinic, the nurse noticed my shaking hands. I asked her about the road. Her smile vanished instantly. She told me her brother vanished there 10 years ago after pulling over to check his tires. His truck was found idling, door open, no footprints, no body. On the drive back, I promised myself I'd take the long route next time. But halfway onto the Whistling Road again, the sound returned, closer now. And this time, it was whistling my name. I wish I could say I turned back that night, but I didn't. I needed the money, and fear doesn't pay rent. The next evening, I prepared myself. Windows up, radio loud, eyes forward. My goal was to treat the road like it didn't exist. Just another stretch of asphalt. 5 minutes in, the radio cut out again. Static filled the cab, rising and falling like breathing. Then the whistling started, slow, deliberate, and closer than before. I kept driving, repeating my name silently like a shield. That's when I saw movement in the headlights. A figure stood on the roadside, tall, too still. No reflective clothing, no flashlight. Just a man-shaped silhouette facing away from me. I didn't slow down. I couldn't. As I passed, the figure turned its head, not its body, just its head, and the whistling stopped. In the rearview mirror, I saw it step into the road behind me. And then, it began running. I slammed the accelerator to the floor. The truck roared, tires screaming against cracked pavement. Still, the sound of footsteps followed. Fast, wet, impossibly close. The whistling returned, no longer calm, but frantic, broken, like it was struggling to breathe. I refused to look in the mirror again. I knew if I did, something inside me would break. The road curved sharply ahead, and for one terrifying second, the engine sputtered. The truck slowed. The whistling surged right beside my ear, inside the cab, as if someone leaned in from the passenger seat. "Ethan," it whispered. I screamed and hit the curve, barely keeping control. When the engine caught again, the sound vanished instantly. No footsteps, no whistling, just my own sobbing breath. When I reached town, I didn't stop driving. I went straight home and packed a bag. But as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed muddy footprints leading from the road. Straight up to my front door. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch with every light on, gripping a kitchen knife like it meant something. The muddy footprint stopped at my front door, but the handle was clean. That detail bothered me more than anything else. Whatever had followed me knew how doors worked. At sunrise, I called in sick and drove to my parents' place on the other side of town. My father listened quietly as I told him everything. When I mentioned the whistling, his face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. He told me that when he was a teenager, people went missing along that road every few years. Always at night, always drivers. They called it the caller. It learned voices by listening. It whistled first to get your attention. If you answered, it used your voice forever. That evening, I quit my job. I promised myself I'd never drive that road again. But as night fell, I heard whistling outside my parents' house. Soft, patient, waiting. The whistling came from the backyard, drifting through the trees like a lullaby meant for something that couldn't sleep. My father grabbed his shotgun and told me not to move. Through the window, I saw the tree line sway, even though there was no wind. Then the back porch light flickered on. Standing just beyond it was a figure, clearer now than it had been on the road. It wore the shape of a man, but its limbs were too long, joints bending wrong, head tilted like it was curious. Its mouth didn't move, yet the whistling continued. My mother whispered a prayer. I realized then what the caller wanted. Not just drivers, not just voices. It wanted homes, families, places where people felt safe enough to open doors. The porch light burst with a sharp pop, plunging everything into darkness, and in that black silence, the whistling stopped, replaced by knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the back door. No one answered the door. My father stood frozen, shotgun raised but shaking. The knocking came again, harder this time, rattling the glass panes. Each knock felt measured, intelligent, like it understood patience better than we did. Then it spoke. "Dad?" It was my voice, not close, perfect. Same tone, same nervous hitch I'd had since childhood. My mother broke down sobbing, covering her mouth to keep from responding. That's when I understood the real danger. The caller didn't force its way in. It waited for love to open the door. The voice shifted, mimicking my mother next, then my father, rotating through us like it was trying on masks. The knocking stopped. Silence stretched so long my ears rang. When dawn finally crept in, the backyard was empty. No footprints, no signs of anything ever being there. But my father never lowered the shotgun. He just whispered that it would come back. Because now, it knew our voices too. We moved within a week. Different town, different county. I changed jobs, changed routines. I thought distance would solve it. But the caller doesn't follow roads. It follows memory. Months later, I was alone in my new apartment, finally starting to feel normal again. Rain tapped against the windows. The radio played softly. For the first time in a long while, I relaxed. That's when I heard it. Faint, familiar, drifting up from the parking lot below. Whistling. I froze. It was softer now, almost playful, like it was proud of its patience. I didn't look outside. I didn't answer. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark until morning. I don't drive at night anymore. I don't answer unknown voices. And if you ever hear someone whistling on an empty road in Ontario, don't slow down, because once it learns you, it never forgets. A year passed without incident. No whistling, no footsteps. I almost convinced myself it was over. Almost. I started taking evening walks again, telling myself fear only wins if you let it shape your life. One night, my phone rang while I was walking home. The screen showed my own number. I stopped cold. The call ended before I could answer, but a voicemail appeared instantly. There was no greeting, just whistling. It was clearer than ever before, confident, controlled, practiced. I realized then that the caller didn't need to be close anymore. It didn't need roads or forests. It had learned something new. Technology. Voices traveling through wires. When I reached my apartment, my lights were already on. I knew I had turned them off. The front door stood slightly open, swaying gently like someone had just stepped inside. From the darkness beyond the hallway, I heard myself whisper, perfectly calm, "Ethan, you're home." I didn't go inside. I backed away slowly and slept in my car until sunrise, watching my apartment window from across the street. The lights stayed on all night. By morning, the door was closed again. Neighbors said they saw nothing unusual. No one heard a thing. I moved out that same day and never went back for my furniture. I don't know where the caller is now. I don't know how many voices it's collected. But I do know this. Every few months I get a voicemail with no number attached. No words. Just whistling. Always the same tune. If you ever hear it on a quiet road or through your phone late at night, remember this. It doesn't chase you to catch you. It waits for you to recognize it. And once you do, it already knows where you live. My name is Lucas Bennett, and this happened when I was 32 after my divorce, when I thought moving to a quiet Ontario town would help me start over. Dryden was supposed to be peaceful. Small population, long winters, neighbors who minded their own business. My goal was simple. Rebuild my life somewhere nothing ever happened. I bought a cheap house on the edge of town. The realtor was too eager, rushing paperwork, avoiding questions. I assumed it was desperation. Only later did I understand it was relief. The house was old but solid. 2 floors, a basement that smelled faintly of damp concrete. On my first night, while unpacking boxes, I heard a phone ringing. Not my cell. The sound came from inside the walls. A sharp, old-fashioned ring echoing through the house, stopping abruptly when I followed it. I searched every room. No landline, no phone jack. That night, I slept poorly, haunted by the feeling that the house wasn't empty. It was listening. The ringing returned the next night. Same time, 11:47 p.m. Always 3 rings, always stopping the moment I reached the hallway. I checked the basement, crouching beside the exposed beams, heart racing. The sound was louder down there, vibrating through the concrete like it was coming from underground. The neighbors noticed my exhaustion and asked if the house was settling in. One man at the hardware store laughed nervously and said, "It does that at first." When I pressed him, he changed the subject. I tried ignoring it. Bought earplugs, played music, nothing worked. The ringing cut through everything, sharp and insistent, like it was meant only for me. On the 5th night, I finally answered. I stood in the hallway and said, "Hello?" The ringing stopped. Then a voice whispered from inside the wall behind me. "Thank you for picking up. We've been trying to reach you." I spun around, heart hammering. The wall was solid, no cracks, no hidden speaker, just cold, gray concrete. The whisper came again, closer this time, like it had moved inches from me. "You've been chosen," it hissed, breathless, almost excited. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a box. My mind raced, trying to rationalize. Burglars? Hidden microphones? Some elaborate prank? But nothing made sense. There was no one. Nothing. The next morning, I examined the basement thoroughly. Nothing unusual, just dusty pipes and old wiring. But when I went upstairs, a message was scratched into the floorboards near the staircase. "We see you." I called a friend who specialized in paranormal investigations. He drove 2 hours to inspect the house. When we walked the basement together, he went pale, muttering that he'd never seen anything like it. The walls, he said, absorbed energy, maybe even intent. That night, the ringing came again. This time, it wasn't just the phone. The entire house vibrated, as if the walls themselves were screaming for attention. I decided to record the sound that night, placing my phone on the staircase. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the ringing returned, echoing through the rooms. I listened through the recording later. My blood ran cold. Beneath the ringing, faint voices whispered in unison. "We've been waiting. You belong here." I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows felt like it was moving with purpose. The house no longer felt like mine. It felt alive, and it was aware. By morning, the front door was locked from the inside, despite me leaving it open before bed. The message scratched into the floor had multiplied. "Don't leave." I knew then the house didn't just want me, it needed me. And whatever had been calling me through the walls was patient enough to wait until I accepted it. That day, I made a decision. I couldn't stay. But leaving, would it even let me? I spent the day packing what I could, trying not to look at the house too closely. Every wall, every shadow, seemed to watch me. When I glanced toward the basement door, I could swear it quivered on its own, like something beneath it was breathing. Neighbors noticed my frantic pace. One elderly woman whispered, "That house doesn't let people leave." I laughed it off, but her eyes were filled with genuine fear. I realized too late that the entire town knew about the house, and nobody dared mention it openly. That night, I stayed in the living room with all lights blazing. The ringing began again. 3 sharp rings, followed by whispers that I couldn't distinguish. They weren't just voices. They were layered, hundreds of them, like the house was filled with trapped souls communicating through the walls. I called my friend again. He said the house's energy was anchored to me now. Leaving might trigger something worse. But staying was impossible. I decided to spend one last night in the house. I locked myself in my bedroom, pulled the blankets over my head, and tried to ignore the building's creaks. The ringing started at 11:47 p.m., louder than ever. It wasn't coming from a single location. It was everywhere, vibrating through the floor, the walls, the air itself. Suddenly, the bed shook violently. Boxes toppled, pictures fell from walls, and the lights flickered. I crawled to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Then the whispers started forming words. "You can't leave. It's too late." Panic consumed me. I banged on the walls, screamed, anything to escape. The energy in the house was palpable, pressing against me like water. And then, silence. For a few seconds, I dared to hope it was over. But the next moment, the ringing started again. This time, directly behind my head. I pressed my face into the blanket, trying to block out the sound. But it penetrated everything. Skin, bones, even my thoughts. The whispers were clearer now, repeating my name over and over, layering themselves until I couldn't tell which was real. I realized the house wasn't just calling me. It was learning me. Every fear, every hesitation, every small thought I had, it absorbed. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, pulsing as if alive, growing warmer with each heartbeat of mine. Then the bedroom door creaked open. Slowly, the gap widened, though I hadn't touched it. A shadow stretched across the floor, dark and impossible to define. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only watch as the darkness inched closer, waiting for acknowledgement, as if it wanted me to submit willingly. I understood the truth then. It didn't force people out. It didn't need to. People stayed or returned because something inside them was drawn to it. By morning, I had made a decision. I couldn't stay another night. I stuffed clothes into bags and moved toward the front door. The hallway seemed to stretch longer than it should, as if the house itself resisted my leaving. When I touched the doorknob, a sudden cold wind blew through the hallway, extinguishing the lights. The whispers erupted, layered, angry, pleading. "You promised. You promised." I yanked the door open and ran into the snowy streets. Behind me, the house remained quiet, its windows staring like unblinking eyes. The next day, I returned with a moving truck, determined to leave. Everything seemed normal in daylight. No scratches on floors, no phone ringing. The realtor assured me it was all in my imagination. But I knew better. The house had marked me, and it would always find a way to remind me of its presence. Weeks passed. I stayed with friends, changed my routines, even started sleeping in a different town for a few nights. I tried to convince myself I had escaped. But at precisely 11:47 p.m., my phone rang. No number, no caller ID. Just the sound of that same old-fashioned ringing. I answered silently, fearing what I would hear. Beneath the ring, faint whispers layered together, forming my name. Then one voice, unmistakably mine, came through. It said, "We're still waiting for you, Lucas." I dropped the phone. My hands trembled uncontrollably. It had followed me. Not through roads, not through walls, but through sound. It had learned my voice, my fears, my habits. I realized then that the house wasn't just a location. It was a presence, tethered to me in a way I could never break. I spent the night in a friend's basement, hiding, listening to my voicemail fill with whistling and whispered commands I couldn't understand. By morning, I returned to my apartment in daylight. Nothing was out of place. The furniture, the walls, the floor, all normal. But I knew the truth. The house in Dryden didn't end at its walls. It had moved with me. It had learned me. I've tried ignoring it. I've moved towns again, changed my phone. But sometimes, when it's late, I hear faint ringing through the walls or a voice mimicking my own in whispers that only I can hear. The house never needs to appear in person anymore. It only needs me to remember, to answer. I've learned my lesson. Never answer the call. Never trust the silence in old houses. And if you ever hear a ringing in the dead of night, in a house that's supposed to be empty, don't. Because somewhere, Someone or something is listening. My name is Derek Collins, and this happened when I was 28, working my first seasonal job as a lighthouse keeper on the northern tip of Manitoulin Island, Ontario. I had always loved isolation. Long walks along rocky shores, wind whipping my hair, the endless water horizon. But I quickly learned that isolation has a price. The lighthouse was old, built in the 1800s, with a narrow spiral staircase and thick fog that rolled in unexpectedly. My goal was simple: keep the light operational and document weather conditions. But on the third night, I heard something that made my stomach turn. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps on the metal walkway outside. But no one was visible through the thick fog. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. The sound circled the tower, stopping suddenly when I approached the edge. By midnight, a light flashed across the water, too bright, too close. And then it vanished, leaving the night silent except for the sound of waves and something waiting. The next morning, I found strange marks on the metal railing outside. Deep, jagged scratches, as if something had tried to climb up. My mind searched for logical explanations. Raccoons, weather damage, maybe a shipwreck survivor trying to get my attention. None fit. The local townsfolk warned me not to stay out on the cliffs after dusk. Old legends of a watcher of the lighthouse circulated, but I shrugged them off. Superstition always hides in isolated towns. That evening, the footsteps returned. Louder this time, echoing on the iron walkway above the crashing waves. I shone my flashlight across the fog, catching glimpses of a tall figure in a tattered coat, moving without sound. The thing disappeared each time I blinked. Then came the whispers. Harsh, distant, carried by the wind. Words I didn't understand, but their intent was clear. This was not a place meant for the living. That night, I decided to stay inside and monitor the lighthouse from the control room. The foghorn groaned intermittently, vibrating through the metal walls. But even inside, I could hear it. Footsteps circling the tower, slow and deliberate, keeping pace with my every movement. I tried to call the mainland for backup, but the radio crackled and failed. Static filled my ears, but beneath it, I could hear the faintest whisper. "Stay. Don't leave." The voice was hollow, ancient, yet somehow familiar. I climbed the spiral staircase to check the top. The railing outside was empty. The sea beyond the fog stretched infinitely. I told myself it was exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. Then I saw it. A shadow on the edge of the cliff, moving impossibly fast. One moment it was far, the next, right beneath the lighthouse. It didn't run. It didn't walk. It glided, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I tried to rationalize. Perhaps it was a survivor from a shipwreck, desperate and insane. But the footprints on the cliff didn't make sense. They started and ended abruptly, as if something appeared from nowhere. The wind picked up, carrying whispers that sounded like multiple voices, overlapping and echoing. "Keeper, join us, forever." My heart raced. I realized the lighthouse wasn't just a job. It was a trap, a place that lured you with solitude, then fed on your fear. I considered leaving, but the fog had thickened into a wall. The cliffs disappeared. The light from the lighthouse reflected only into the gray void. Every instinct screamed that moving outside meant death. The figure reappeared at the top, barely visible through the mist, standing perfectly still. Then it raised an arm, pointing directly at me, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment. I stayed frozen, gripping the railing as the wind howled around the tower. The figure didn't move. but the fog shifted as if alive, curling toward me in ghostly tendrils. My mind screamed to run, but my legs refused to obey. It wasn't just the figure, it was the air, the lighthouse itself, pressing in on me with a presence I couldn't comprehend. I remembered the old journal I'd found in the basement when I first arrived. The previous keeper had written in jagged letters about a watcher that never left. I thought it was superstition, until that moment. A sudden clap of thunder shook the tower, and the figure vanished. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. From below, I heard scratching against the metal walkway. Soft at first, then urgent, like something climbing. I realized that leaving the top didn't end the danger. It was all around me, waiting. I clutched the staircase tightly, trying to calm myself before descending. I descended the spiral staircase slowly, every step echoing against the hollow tower. The scratching followed me, climbing the metal supports, circling below, as if whatever it was had learned to anticipate my movements. Back in the control room, I bolted the door, shivering. The foghorn groaned again, but beneath it, the whispers returned, soft but urgent. Do not leave. Do not look. My heart pounded. The journal flashed in my memory. The previous keeper had vanished after hearing the same whispers. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. My radio sputtered to life, spewing static. Then faintly, almost imperceptibly, the voice of the previous keeper whispered, "He waits. For you." I realized then that the lighthouse wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. It was predatory. It waited for isolation, for vulnerability. And now, it had me. I knew leaving alone would be impossible. Whatever the watcher was, it would follow. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was imagining it. Exhaustion, isolation, fear, they twist the mind. But the evidence was undeniable. Footprints appeared on the metal walkway outside, though I hadn't left the control room. Scratches marred the walls where nothing could have climbed. And the whispers. They knew my name. By midnight, the figure returned. I saw it through the fogged windows, closer than before. Its coat was shredded, soaked from the waves below, but its movements were unnatural, almost floating, almost gliding. It raised a hand again, pointing at me, demanding attention, and the whispers swelled into a chorus of voices repeating, "Stay. Keep the light burning. Forever." Panic surged. I realized that the lighthouse itself was an extension of the Watcher. It fed on presence, on attention, on compliance. Every second I hesitated made it stronger, more confident. I understood then why previous keepers had vanished. This place didn't just isolate you. It claimed you. I attempted to leave. Every instinct screamed to run. But the spiral staircase stretched impossibly before me, as if the lighthouse itself had grown taller. The scratching intensified, echoing through the tower like hundreds of nails on metal. The whispers now had rhythm, synchronized with my heartbeat. "Do not leave. It waits." I reached the top, desperate. The figure was closer than ever, standing at the edge of the balcony, waiting. I tried calling out, my voice trembling. The fog parted briefly, revealing its pale face, hollow eyes staring directly into mine. Lightning illuminated the cliffs below, showing jagged rocks and freezing water. A cold, unearthly wind slammed the door shut behind me. The Watcher wasn't just a presence. It was alive, aware, patient, and it had made me part of its ritual. I realized with dread. Leaving the lighthouse alive might never be possible. The Watcher demanded more than obedience. It demanded surrender. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning inside the lighthouse. I stayed huddled in the control room, listening to the wind and the persistent scratching, hoping to outlast it. But then, a loud crash shook the tower. The figure had breached the balcony railing, standing at the threshold like it owned the place. I grabbed a fire extinguisher for defense, my hands trembling. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, demanding, "Stay, keep the light, join us." I realized then that the Watcher didn't just want isolation. It wanted me to replace someone, to become part of the Lighthouse forever. In a moment of desperation, I ran down the staircase, but the steps stretched endlessly, impossible in geometry and proportion. The lighthouse itself was alive, reshaping to trap me. The figure glided ahead, always just out of reach, pointing, beckoning, forcing me to move. I finally understood. Escape wasn't just about leaving. It was about surviving the lighthouse's will, and that was never guaranteed. By dawn, I stumbled outside, gasping, covered in sweat and bruises, the cold biting through my jacket. The lighthouse loomed behind me, silent now, almost peaceful in the morning light. I ran to the edge of the cliffs, my legs weak, and dared to glance back. The figure was gone. The whispers had faded. But I knew it wasn't over. The lighthouse had marked me. I could feel its presence lingering, tethered invisibly to my mind. Every gust of wind, every shadow at the edge of my vision reminded me that the Watcher was patient. It would wait for me to falter, to return, to answer its call again. I left Manitoulin Island that day and never returned. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in and the wind carries across the northern waters, I hear the faintest echo of scratching against metal and whispers calling my name. The lighthouse didn't need to follow. It only needed me to remember. My name is Amelia Rhodes, and this happened when I was 25, working as an urban explorer in Ontario. Kingston had a dark past I was eager to document. Abandoned buildings, forgotten institutions, places children had been sent and never truly left. One building caught my attention, a large, crumbling orphanage on the outskirts of town. Its windows were boarded, but faint whispers seemed to leak through the cracks. My goal was simple: take photographs, document decay, leave before sunset. But curiosity, as always, demanded more. I squeezed through a side entrance, flashlight in hand. The air inside was cold, damp, and heavy with the scent of mildew and something far older. Rusted cribs and broken toys littered the hallways. As I stepped further in, I noticed tiny handprints in the dust, too small to belong to anyone alive today. Then I heard it. A soft, high-pitched giggle from the top floor. I froze, holding my breath. The giggle repeated, closer this time, echoing down the long hallway. My flashlight flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move independently. I whispered, "Hello?" But there was no response, only the sound of tiny footsteps pacing above me. I ascended the stairs slowly, each creak amplifying my fear. The upper floor was worse. Peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and a strange cold that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. On the floor, I saw a series of drawings in red chalk, children's faces, all with hollow eyes, some smiling, some screaming. Then the whispers began, faint, overlapping, unintelligible. But I could make out one word repeated over and over. "Stay." I realized, with a shiver, that this orphanage wasn't just abandoned. Something remained, waiting, watching. And it didn't like intruders. I crept down the hall, trying to steady my breathing, flashlight trembling in my hand. Every door I passed seemed to whisper, as though the walls themselves were speaking. Tiny footsteps followed me. disappearing whenever I tried to look behind. In one of the classrooms, I found a small desk with a single notebook lying open. The pages were filled with writing I couldn't recognize. Scribbles, symbols, and drawings of children with hollow eyes. A chill ran down my spine as I realized some of the faces looked eerily familiar. Suddenly, I heard a door slam shut behind me. The giggles multiplied, echoing from every corner. Shadows darted along the walls, some moving faster than my eyes could track. I felt watched, targeted, as though the orphanage itself had recognized me as an intruder. The air grew colder, and my flashlight dimmed, flickering erratically. I knew then that this place wasn't just haunted. It was alive, feeding off fear and curiosity alike. I ran toward the stairs, desperate to leave, but the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly. The whispers became louder, overlapping, now intelligible in parts. "You shouldn't be here. Stay, stay." I glanced at the dusty floor and saw footprints that weren't mine. Tiny, bare, moving alongside me. I spun around, but no one was there. My heart raced. Every instinct screamed to leave, but the orphanage wasn't finished with me. Then I saw them. Dozens of small faces peering at me from cracks in the walls, hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Their mouths opened in unison, releasing a single word that chilled me to the bone. Forever. I bolted up the stairs, stumbling over debris, the giggles and whispers chasing me relentlessly. Each step felt heavier, as if the building itself resisted my escape. I realized this orphanage didn't just trap bodies, it trapped minds. I reached the top of the staircase, gasping for air, and paused to collect myself. The shadows seemed to pulse along the walls, stretching toward me like dark, grasping fingers. I shone my flashlight across the hallway, and dozens of small handprints appeared, pressed into the dust as if invisible children had just touched the floor. The whispers intensified, overlapping into a chilling chorus. "Stay. Play with us. Forever." My instinct screamed that I should run. But the building itself groaned, doors slamming shut in response. Every exit seemed to vanish, replaced by endless hallways lined with the smiling, hollow-eyed faces of the children. I stumbled into what looked like the dining hall. Rusted utensils clattered to the floor as if thrown by invisible hands. Toys rolled across the floor, moving toward me of their own volition. I realized then that the orphanage wasn't merely haunted. It was sentient, angry at the intrusion, determined to make me one of them. I backed into a corner, heart racing, as the whispering grew louder, sharper, like teeth gnashing around my mind. The temperature dropped dramatically. My breath formed misty clouds that hovered in the air. Shadows stretched unnaturally, slithering along the walls toward me. Then I noticed something even more disturbing. A rocking chair moving gently on its own, slowly turning to face me. Its occupant, a small, shadowy figure, was hollow-eyed, smiling in a way that made my stomach turn. I could feel it staring into my soul. I screamed, bolted past the chair, and tried every door in sight. Each led to the same hallway, stretching further than logic should allow. The orphanage wasn't just keeping me inside. It was disorienting me, warping reality around me, feeding on my terror. I realized that leaving this place alive would require more than running. I would need to outsmart something far older, far crueler than any human mind could comprehend. I forced myself to keep moving, adrenaline pushing me forward despite every instinct screaming to hide. The hallways twisted unnaturally, corners extending farther than they should. Every shadow seemed alive, watching, waiting for me to slip, to falter. The whispers had grown into full sentences now. "You belong here. Play forever. Don't leave. I stumbled into what had once been the nursery. Broken cribs lay in heaps, toys scattered like frozen memories. In the corner, dozens of small, shadowy figures swayed, facing me. Their hollow eyes glimmered faintly in the dim light, and their soft giggles filled the room, reverberating through my skull. Panic clawed at me, but I refused to give in. I remembered the journal I had glimpsed downstairs, the warnings scrawled in frantic handwriting. The previous explorers had underestimated the orphanage's intelligence, and I knew I couldn't make the same mistake. I backed toward a staircase leading to the roof, hoping the outside world might offer escape. I ascended toward the roof, every step echoing loudly, but the orphanage responded. Doors slammed below, windows rattled, and the whispers became deafening, layering themselves into a constant chant. Forever. Stay forever. At the rooftop door, I paused. The night sky was black and endless, and fog curled around the edges of the building like ghostly fingers. But the orphanage wasn't done with me yet. I glanced back and saw a shadow at the staircase's base, taller and darker than any child should be. It raised a hand, pointing directly at me, and the giggles intensified, echoing from all directions. I understood then that this wasn't a building. It was a predator. It manipulated space, sound, and fear to trap its victims. I had only one chance. Run, leap into the unknown, and hope the world outside still existed beyond the orphanage's grasp. I leapt from the rooftop, heart pounding, crashing into the overgrown courtyard below. Pain shot through my legs, but I didn't stop. Behind me, the orphanage seemed to stretch taller. Windows like hollow eyes, shadows spilling from every corner, chasing me relentlessly. The whispers followed me, echoing from every angle. Forever. Stay. You belong. I ran through twisted weeds and broken paths, tripping over toys that moved of their own volition, each step a reminder that the orphanage wanted me trapped, wanted me to join the endless chorus of children it kept. I stumbled toward the gate, and the fog parted enough to show me the road beyond. A glimmer of hope surged. But just as I reached for the latch, a cold hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around. Nothing. Just a shadow stretching and twisting before vanishing into the night. I bolted into the darkness, finally feeling the town's lights ahead. I hadn't escaped entirely. The orphanage had marked me. I made it to the main road, panting, bruised, and terrified. Behind me, the orphanage loomed, silent and still, as though nothing had happened. But I could feel it. The lingering presence of the children, the whispers etched into my mind, following me silently. Days later, I returned to Kingston to check the building in daylight. It appeared abandoned, decayed, empty. No shadows, no sounds, no signs of life. But at night, I would sometimes hear faint giggles carried by the wind, whispers just outside my window, and shadows that moved unnaturally in the corners of my room. I learned that some places don't just hold memories. They hold the people who once lived there. And some places, like the orphanage, feed on fear, curiosity, and intrusion. I left Kingston soon after, and I have never returned. But sometimes, when I hear a child giggle in the distance, I know that the orphanage is still watching, still waiting. My name is Ethan Marshall, and this happened when I was 26, backpacking alone through Algonquin Provincial Park, Ontario. I had heard tales from locals about a small cabin deep in the woods, abandoned, untouched for decades, yet somehow alive. The stories called it cursed, but I laughed them off. I was looking for adventure, not ghosts. After a long day of hiking, I found it. A weathered wooden cabin surrounded by dense pines, fog curling around the trunks. Smoke-colored clouds hung low, muting the sunset. My goal was simple: explore, take photographs, maybe spend the night if conditions worsened. Inside, the air was cold and heavy with a musty, almost metallic scent. Dust covered every surface. Yet the fireplace had a few ashes that were unnaturally black, almost fresh. Then I heard it. The floorboards creaking above me. Though the cabin had only one floor, I froze, straining to hear. The creaking continued, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin as if someone or something was pacing. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded tiny, swallowed by the forest around me. No response. Curiosity overpowered fear. I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the staircase that wasn't supposed to exist, leading to a small attic. Dust swirled in the beam, and the air grew colder with every step. The creaking above intensified, now accompanied by faint whispers, almost too soft to understand. I reached the attic door and hesitated. Something was off. The shadows in the corners of the cabin seemed darker than they should be, writhing subtly, almost breathing. Then I saw it. A small, almost imperceptible figure peering at me from the far corner, half hidden in darkness. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its gaze drilling into my soul, waiting. I stepped closer, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The figure didn't move, yet I could feel its awareness. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest. I told myself it was a trick of the shadows, exhaustion or imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The creaking above turned into dragging steps, slow and deliberate. They circled the cabin, stopping abruptly when I froze. The whispers grew louder, overlapping. "Leave, stay, join." The voice was fractured, almost as if 100 children spoke at once. I turned to leave the attic, but the door slammed shut on its own. The cabin seemed to breathe, the walls pulsing slightly, as if alive. My flashlight flickered violently, revealing fleeting glimpses of dozens of tiny hands pressed against the wooden walls, reaching toward me. Panic overtook me. I pounded on the door, screaming, but the cabin responded with silence. Then the dragging steps stopped, leaving a hollow, oppressive stillness that made my ears ring. I found a small window in the attic and tried to pry it open. Outside, the fog had thickened into a wall of gray. The forest was indistinguishable from the mist. I couldn't see the path I had walked hours before. My heart hammered. I realized I had no idea if I was even still in Algonquin. Then I heard it. A whispering laugh, soft but cruel, circling me from all directions. The attic floorboards creaked under invisible weight. The figure in the corner shifted slightly, revealing hollow eyes that seemed to glow faintly. Every instinct screamed to run, but where could I go? I remembered the tales I had laughed off. Hikers had gone missing near this cabin before, and none were ever found. I understood now why. The cabin didn't just exist in the forest. It existed around you, reshaping reality, isolating anyone who dared enter. The attic door groaned, and I felt a cold breeze brush past me, as if inviting me to step into the unknown. I climbed down from the attic, desperate for an exit. Every step on the warped wooden stairs groaned beneath me, but I couldn't tell if the noise was mine or something else moving above. The dragging footsteps returned, echoing all around the cabin. I could feel the presence circling, intelligent, patient, waiting for me to make a mistake. The main room of the cabin had changed. Dust-covered furniture had shifted, forming a narrow corridor that led me nowhere familiar. The fireplace glowed faintly, though no fire burned, casting long, twisted shadows across the walls. The whispers grew louder, pressing against my mind. "Stay, stay, you belong." I turned to leave through the door, but it slammed shut violently. Panic surged as I realized the cabin was no longer just a structure. It was a predator, a living trap that fed on fear and disorientation. I had to think quickly. Running blindly would only play into its design. I remembered a narrow trap door beneath a tattered rug near the corner of the room. With trembling hands, I pried it open, revealing a dark crawl space leading beneath the cabin. The air inside smelled of damp earth and decay. I had no other choice. I squeezed through, heart pounding. The whispers followed, echoing from above. "You cannot leave. You belong." Each step in the crawl space felt longer than reality should allow. Shadows flickered along the walls, forming shapes that seemed to watch me from every angle. I realized the cabin's influence extended beyond sight, twisting perception itself to keep intruders trapped. At the far end of the tunnel, I glimpsed faint moonlight through a crack in the foundation. Relief surged. Maybe I could escape. But the shadows weren't done. From the corner of my vision, I saw movement, fast, impossible. Something was following me underground, patient and relentless. I pushed forward, knowing that one mistake could make this crawl space my grave. I crawled through the tunnel, my flashlight flickering, each step echoing like a drumbeat of terror. The air grew colder, denser, as though the cabin itself was pressing down on me. I could feel the presence following, silent, patient, always just behind. The whispers had become a chorus now, chanting, "You cannot leave. Join us, forever." Suddenly, the dirt beneath my hands shifted, and I stumbled into a small underground chamber. The walls were etched with countless scratches and symbols, some resembling faces with hollow eyes, others impossible to interpret. It was then I realized the cabin didn't just trap the living. It collected the lost, feeding on those who entered until they became part of its walls, part of its memory. A faint glow appeared at the far end of the chamber. I crawled toward it, every nerve screaming, hoping it led outside. But the glow pulsed unnaturally, almost alive, as if the cabin itself was testing me, waiting to see if I would falter. I reached the glow and discovered a small hatch, just big enough to crawl through. Relief surged, but the whispers became frantic, urgent, echoing all around. "Do not leave. Stay with us. Forever." I ignored them, praying the exit would actually lead me outside. Just as I began to climb, shadows emerged from the walls, black tendrils that lashed toward me. I ducked, barely escaping, my hands scraping against the rough wood. The cabin was alive, every wall, floor, and ceiling part of its will, determined to claim me. With one final effort, I pulled myself through the hatch and stumbled into the cold night. The fog hung thick among the trees, but I could see the faint outline of the main trail. The whispers faded, but the sensation of being watched lingered, as if the cabin had only released me temporarily. I ran without looking back, knowing that the cabin would remain, waiting for the next curious soul to wander in. I ran through the foggy forest, lungs burning, heart hammering, every snap of a twig making me flinch. The moonlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, yet I could swear shadows flitted just beyond my vision. Behind me, faint whispers echoed through the trees, persistent, almost pleading. "You cannot leave. Stay with us. Forever." I reached the trail, gasping for air, feeling the weight of exhaustion, fear, and disbelief pressing down. The trees seemed to close in, branches scratching at my jacket as if trying to pull me back. I glanced behind, and for a moment, I thought I saw the cabin itself shifting in the fog. the roof stretching taller, the windows forming hollow eyes, watching me. I didn't stop running. The forest eventually opened to a familiar road, and I stumbled onto it, panting, shaking, and coated in mud and sweat. I finally felt safe. But I knew that the cabin's presence hadn't fully left me. I reached the edge of the park and found a ranger's cabin, lights on, smoke curling from the chimney. Relief washed over me as I pounded on the door. When I turned to look back, the forest looked ordinary. No sign of the vanishing cabin, no warped shadows, nothing. Yet I could feel it, lingering in my mind, etched into memory. Days later, I returned to civilization, but the experience haunted me. Every shadow in a dark room, every whisper of wind, reminded me of the cabin's reach. I told friends, tried to rationalize it, but I knew the truth. Some places aren't just abandoned. They live, breathe, and remember those who enter. I have never returned to Algonquin. But sometimes, when fog creeps across the roads or mist swirls between the trees, I feel the cabin calling, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close. My name is Liam Carter, and this happened when I was 24, camping alone in the remote forests near Thunder Bay, Ontario. I had always loved solitude, the quiet of nature, the chance to disconnect. But there was one area locals avoided, the Whispering Woods. They said strange sounds carried through the trees, voices that mimicked your name, drawing travelers deeper until they vanished. I didn't believe them. My goal was simple: hike in, set up camp, and enjoy the stars. But as I entered the woods, an uneasy stillness settled over me. The birds were silent. The wind barely stirred the leaves. The further I walked, the heavier the air felt, as though the forest itself was watching, measuring, waiting. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, almost indistinguishable from the wind, calling my name. Liam? I stopped, scanning the shadows, but saw nothing. My rational mind tried to reason it away, but the whisper came again, closer, more insistent. I shook my head, convincing myself it was the wind or an animal. But then I heard another sound, a soft crunch of leaves behind me. My pulse quickened. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the dim light, but nothing was there. Only the trees, tall and silent, swaying unnaturally. I continued walking, trying to reach a clearing I had marked on my map. The whispers returned, overlapping now, echoing through the trunks. Liam, come closer, stay. I realized they weren't just sounds. They had a pattern, a rhythm, almost intelligent. Then I noticed movement between the trees, shadows that didn't match the branches, gliding instead of swaying. My stomach churned. The forest wasn't just empty. It was alive, aware of me. Every step felt heavier, as if the ground itself resisted my passage. I knew then that the Whispering Woods weren't a place to explore. They were a trap, and I was already caught. I tried to quicken my pace, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly. Every path I knew twisted into unfamiliar angles, and every tree looked like a shadowy sentinel, watching, waiting. The whispers grew louder, forming words I didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Menacing, almost hungry. Come. Stay. You're ours. My flashlight flickered, revealing fleeting glimpses of movement, tall, thin figures darting between the trees, faster than I could track. I stumbled over roots and rocks, adrenaline surging, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed to run, but I didn't know which way led out. The forest had swallowed the trail, and the night seemed to press in from every side. Then I noticed scratches along the bark of the nearest trees, deep, claw-like gouges, some forming symbols, others vaguely human shapes. It was as if something had marked the territory, warning intruders like me to turn back or be claimed. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a massive pine, trying to convince myself it was just exhaustion. But then the whispers became different. They started mimicking me, repeating my own thoughts aloud. "You're tired. Why fight? Stay with us." My stomach turned. The forest wasn't just alive, it knew me. A sudden rustle behind me made me spin. My flashlight caught glimpses of thin, elongated shapes slipping between the trunks. They didn't run. They glided, silent, almost floating, eyes faintly glowing in the darkness. Every step I tried to take forward seemed slower, like wading through thick air. The fog thickened, swirling around my legs, and I realized with growing terror that I was losing sense of direction. The trees moved subtly, shifting in ways that should have been impossible, corralling me deeper into the heart of the woods. Escape was no longer a matter of walking. It was a test of survival against a forest that hunted with intent. I pushed forward, moving as quickly as I could, but the forest seemed to resist. Roots that hadn't been there before grabbed at my feet, tripping me, and shadows stretched unnaturally, blocking the paths I thought I knew. The whispers had multiplied, a chorus of eerie voices calling my name, mocking my every step. "Liam, you cannot leave. Forever." I stumbled into a small clearing. Moonlight broke through the canopy, but it didn't bring comfort. The shadows at the edges of the clearing were thicker, moving independently of the trees, forming shapes that resembled human figures, tall and thin, yet grotesquely distorted. My flashlight flickered again, barely cutting through the darkness. I realized with a jolt that the whispers weren't just behind me. They were everywhere, coming from the trees, the fog, even beneath my feet. The forest itself was alive, hunting, and I was no longer an intruder. I was prey. Panic surged, and I ran, zigzagging through the trees, trying to shake the feeling that I was being corralled. The shadows mirrored my movements, always staying just out of reach. The whispers escalated into a deafening chorus, overlapping, chanting in voices I could almost understand. "Stay. Stay with us. You're ours." Branches scratched at my arms, roots tore at my boots, and every step forward felt like I was sinking. I realized the forest wasn't following normal rules. Distances stretched, paths twisted impossibly, the way out disappearing as quickly as I tried to move toward it. Then I noticed a faint light ahead, flickering and small, like a distant campsite. Hope surged. I ran toward it, ignoring the shadows that seemed to pulse behind me, hearing one final, sinister whisper. "The woods always take what they want." I didn't look back. I couldn't. Survival depended on forward motion, even if forward was uncertain. I sprinted through the forest, branches whipping my face, roots tripping me at every step. The distant light flickered ahead, like a beacon of hope, yet the shadows followed relentlessly. They moved unnaturally fast, sliding across the forest floor, stretching higher than trees should allow, and whispering my name in a tone that was both playful and cruel. Suddenly, the path seemed to vanish. The trees bent inward, forming a tunnel of darkness, corralling me deeper into the heart of the whispering woods. Every instinct screamed to stop, but fear propelled me forward. I stumbled onto a shallow stream, moonlight reflecting off the water, giving me a brief sense of orientation. But the shadows surged across it, their elongated forms twisting and writhing. I realized I couldn't outrun them in the usual sense. The forest was alive, aware, and intent on claiming me. Survival required cunning, not speed. I ducked behind a fallen log, praying they wouldn't notice the rustle. I crouched behind the log, heart hammering, trying to steady my breathing. The shadows moved closer, whispering faster, their voices overlapping into an almost incomprehensible chant. "You cannot leave. Join us. Forever." Every fiber of my being screamed to run, but I couldn't risk being seen. Then I noticed a narrow opening between two massive pines, just wide enough to slip through. It seemed almost impossible, like the forest was testing me, presenting a final challenge before letting me escape. I darted toward it, pressing myself to the ground, listening to the whispers swirl around me, growing frantic and desperate. As I pushed through the gap, the world outside the whispering woods began to take shape. A small clearing bathed in moonlight. The shadows recoiled at the edge, and the whispers faded slightly, leaving only a lingering sense of being watched. I emerged, trembling, knowing I had survived. But not without a price. I stumbled into the clearing, gasping for air, my clothes torn and muddy. The forest behind me was silent again, but I knew better than to believe it was truly gone. Every instinct in my body screamed that the whispering woods had marked me. I could still hear faint echoes of the whispers in my mind, like distant voices trapped in a half-remembered dream. I collapsed onto the soft grass, trembling, listening to the night. The wind carried no birdsong, no ordinary rustling, only the oppressive quiet of a forest that had almost consumed me. The distant moonlight highlighted the clearing, but it felt unnatural, as if the forest itself had shaped the light to mock my escape. Even as I made my way back to the main trail, I could sense eyes on me, shadows moving just beyond the visible trees, aware that I had survived, but only barely. I realized the whispering woods didn't need to claim me completely. They only needed to remind me of their presence. When I finally emerged from the forest, I reached a small ranger station along the trail. The lights were warm, inviting, and for a moment, I felt safe. But the memory of the whispers, the elongated shadows, and the forest's unnatural shifts stayed with me. I knew I had been forever changed. Back in town, I tried to recount the story, but locals just nodded, their expressions wary. Some called it exaggeration. Others whispered quietly about the missing hikers who never returned. I understood now. The whispering woods weren't just a place. They were a predator, patient and cunning, claiming minds as easily as bodies. Even now, years later, whenever I hear the wind swirl through pines or catch a glimpse of shadows in the corner of my eye, I remember. The forest never forgot me, and I know I will never truly leave the whispering woods. My name is Sophie Reynolds, and this happened when I was 23, working as a summer caretaker for the old Lighthouse on Manitoulin Island, Ontario. The locals warned me about it. Tales of strange lights at night, eerie cries carried by the wind, and ships that vanished mysteriously near the cliffs. I didn't believe in curses, but the island had a history I couldn't ignore. The lighthouse stood tall and isolated, surrounded by jagged cliffs and the restless waters of Lake Huron. On my first night, the wind howled through the narrow windows, and the old metal staircase creaked as if echoing unseen footsteps. I tried to settle into the solitude, documenting maintenance work, but an unease lingered. Something about the place felt alive. By midnight, I was awakened by a faint tapping, rhythmic, coming from the top of the lighthouse. I grabbed my flashlight, climbing the spiral staircase cautiously. Each step groaned under my weight, yet the tapping seemed slightly ahead of me, always one step further. As I reached the top, the tapping stopped. I scanned the lantern room, flashlight sweeping over the rusty railing and shattered glass panels. Nothing. Yet I could feel it. A presence lingering in the corners just beyond sight. The wind outside seemed to carry whispers, almost human, almost pleading. I shook my head, trying to rationalize it. Old buildings creak, the wind howls, and isolation plays tricks on the mind. But then I noticed the light itself. The massive beacon swung irregularly, casting shadows that shouldn't exist. Shapes formed and dissolved on the cliff walls below, moving too deliberately to be natural. Suddenly, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, icy and deliberate. "Leave, before it finds you." My pulse spiked. I had expected solitude, but the lighthouse demanded more. I realized it wasn't abandoned. Something waited, watching, patient, ancient. I backed away from the lantern room window, heart hammering, knowing my summer was about to become a fight for survival. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just fatigue and the isolation of the island playing tricks on my mind. But the feeling of being watched didn't fade. The whispers grew louder, now echoing through the stone walls of the lighthouse itself, bouncing in directions that made no sense. "You shouldn't be here. Leave now." I turned to leave the lantern room and froze. Across the floor, water droplets were forming, but they weren't dripping from the ceiling. They were rising, hovering above the ground like tiny silver orbs, moving toward me in a deliberate pattern. My rational mind screamed that it was impossible, yet my eyes refused to look away. The shadows on the walls twisted and stretched unnaturally, forming faces, anguished, twisted, silently screaming. Something about them felt familiar, like a memory I couldn't recall. The lighthouse wasn't just haunted, it was alive. A vessel for something older, something that had watched the waters for centuries, waiting for the next caretaker to stumble into its grasp. I backed toward the staircase, trying to rationalize a way out. But the staircase had changed. It spiraled impossibly, stretching upward beyond what physics should allow. Each step I took echoed unnaturally, like footsteps of someone or something following me. The whispers now surrounded me entirely, circling, repeating my name over and over. "Sophie, stay forever." A sudden gust of wind slammed the lantern room door shut, and the beacon light flickered violently, casting jagged, moving shadows across the cliffs outside. Shapes danced on the rocks, elongated, grotesque, moving in ways that defied natural law. The presence in the lighthouse was patient, waiting for fear to settle fully in my chest before it acted. I realized the warnings weren't just superstition. The lighthouse demanded obedience. Every instinct screamed to leave, but my mind felt paralyzed, caught in the hypnotic rhythm of whispers and the eerie swinging of the beacon. One wrong move, and the lighthouse would claim me entirely. I forced myself to keep moving down the spiral staircase, my hands clutching the cold metal railing. Each step groaned under my weight, yet I could feel additional pressure, as if invisible hands pressed against my back, urging me forward, or perhaps holding me in place. The whispers continued, louder, forming coherent warnings. "Do not descend. Water takes. The light watches." As I reached the lower floors, I noticed something chilling. The walls were covered in old, faded inscriptions, etched deep with jagged claws or tools. Names, dates, and symbols marked the stone, some so old I couldn't read them. Each seemed to tell the story of a caretaker who had vanished, claimed by the lighthouse in one way or another. My blood ran cold. I wasn't the first to hear the whispers, the voices, or see the shadows. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the end of the corridor, barely visible in the dim light. Its form was indistinct, yet I recognized the pose, the stance. It was human, but wrong, twisted, and far too still. I froze, heart hammering, staring at the shadowy figure. It didn't move, yet I could feel its awareness, its gaze burning through me. The whispers swirled around, now urgent, chaotic. Leave, leave, you are ours. My mind screamed at me to run, yet my legs refused to obey. Then the air shifted. A cold, unnatural breeze swept down the corridor, carrying the smell of salt and decay. The figure advanced silently, gliding rather than walking, and the inscriptions on the walls seemed to writhe in response, twisting into new patterns, almost alive. The lighthouse wasn't just haunted. It was a sentient predator, feeding on fear, shaping reality to trap me. I bolted past the figure, stumbling through the corridor. The stairwell ahead warped strangely, stretching farther than it should, leading me toward a faint flicker of light that I hoped would be my escape. Behind me, the whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices that promised retribution if I faltered. I reached the base of the lighthouse, gasping for air, but relief was fleeting. The heavy wooden door leading outside was warped, groaning as though it resisted my escape. I pulled on it with all my strength, finally forcing it open, only to be met with a chilling sight. The night outside had changed. The cliffs were shrouded in thick fog, the waves crashing below taller and darker than I had ever seen, and the moonlight stretched unnaturally across the rocks. From the fog, I glimpsed shadows moving along the cliffs, elongated, humanoid, but distorted, like twisted reflections of my own figure. The whispers followed, now rising above the roar of the lake. You cannot leave. The lighthouse chooses. I realized that the lighthouse wasn't confined to its walls. It influenced the island itself, bending reality to its will. Every instinct screamed to run, but the cliffs seemed endless, and the fog swallowed every path. The lighthouse had drawn me into its dominion, and I was trapped in its curse. I forced myself to move, crawling through the thick fog, clinging to the jagged rocks along the cliffs. The wind whipped at my hair and clothes, carrying the whispers that now seemed almost alive, forming words in a tone that promised both torment and ownership. Stay, the light watches, forever. Ahead, I spotted a narrow path leading down toward a distant tree line. Hope surged, but as I ran, the shadows lunged, twisting through the mist. They moved impossibly fast, gliding over rocks and water alike. One nearly caught me, its hand brushing my shoulder, cold and ethereal. My scream was swallowed by the wind. I dove off the edge of the path into a thicket, rolling down the slope, cutting myself on branches, but reaching solid ground. Behind me, the lighthouse's beacon rotated slowly, a malevolent eye scanning the island, as if aware that I had almost escaped. I realized this curse wasn't just about fear, it was about control. I scrambled through the underbrush toward the forest at the base of the cliffs, every nerve on fire. The fog clung to me like a living thing, and the whispers had transformed into a deafening chorus, repeating my name, mocking my fear. Sophie, you belong to the light. I stumbled onto a narrow trail that I hoped would lead to the ferry dock, but the path twisted unnaturally, loops and bends that shouldn't have existed. Then I caught sight of the lighthouse behind me. Its beacon spun slowly, casting elongated shadows over the island that stretched like fingers, reaching for me. I realized with horror that the lighthouse wasn't just a building. It was a predator, its light a trap, ensnaring all who lingered too long. I ran blindly, guided only by instinct and the distant faint glow of the inhabited shore. Every step felt heavy, as if the island itself resisted me. I knew the lighthouse had marked me, and that it would wait, patient, for the next careless caretaker to arrive. I finally reached the edge of the forest, where the faint lights of the ferry dock glimmered. Relief surged through me, but I dared not celebrate. Every glance over my shoulder reminded me of the lighthouse looming on the cliffs, its beams scanning the horizon like a watchful eye, and the shadows seemed to retreat, but the whispers lingered in my mind, faint yet unyielding. You cannot leave. The light remembers. Once aboard the ferry, I sank into a corner, shaking, my clothes torn, my skin still prickling from the cold and the terror. I never spoke to anyone about the full experience, but I knew the truth. The lighthouse chose whom it would claim, and it had almost claimed me, even years later. When I see a beacon piercing the night or hear wind against old stone, I remember Manitoulin Island. Some places aren't just haunted. They are alive, waiting, patient, eternal. As the night deepens and the shadows stretch long, we've journeyed through the darkest corners of Ontario. Small towns haunted by unspeakable terrors, forests that whisper names in the wind, and lighthouses that trap souls with their cold, watchful light. Each story was a window into horrors that are real, documented, and terrifying beyond imagination. These are not legends, nor tales meant to entertain. They are encounters that left permanent scars on those who lived them. Encounters that remind us that some places are alive in ways we cannot comprehend. From the vanishing cabins of Algonquin to the cursed lighthouse of Manitoulin Island. From the twisting paths of the whispering woods to shadows that linger just beyond the trees. Tonight, we glimpsed the unseen, the malevolent, and the eternal. Remember, some horrors are not confined to pages or screens. They walk beside us, in the night, in the silence, in the places we think we know. Be wary, stay aware, and never forget. The darkness is always watching. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.